and Delta water conditions by Paul Marshall from DWR.
Good evening. I am Paul Marshall with the Department of Water Resources. I'm the chief of the Bay Delta office. I wanted to start off the quick presentation really looking at how the West Falls River barrier or drought barrier works. There was a lot of discussion on that a couple of years ago when we first proposed it. There's a lot of confusion, so I just wanted to kind of give you a real quick illustration. So we have 4 quadrants here. The top is during a flood tide, and the bottom is during an ebb tide. So when the water is coming in from the bay is really depicted on the top set of slides, and the left side is without any barrier in the Frank's Track area, and on the right side is with the barrier. So what really happens is that with the, it's kind of hard to see, but with the no barrier in place in False River, salinity freely goes into the Frank's Track area, and it's kind of like dye going into a cup. Once it gets in there, it starts dispersing right away. With the barrier in there on the right side, the salinity is forced into the San Joaquin River and has to kind of stay in a more or less like a channel, the San Joaquin River, and as it stays in that channel, it kind of acts like plug flow, where when it goes in, it all stays together, all the salinity stays together, and when it goes out, it all stays together. And therefore, on the right-hand side, you see that Frank's Track is not getting as saline during the flood tide. And you can kind of see the when it goes in and out on each tide, both with and without the barrier, you can kind of get an idea that this barrier basically just prevents salinity from getting into Frank's Track. So how did it perform? That's the theory. How did it actually perform? I'd like to talk about these different monitoring stations. First, in the red square on the right, you have up towards the top the Jersey Point location, a monitoring station, and immediately east of that on False River is the False River monitoring station. Beyond that is the Bethel Island station, and then beyond that is the Holland Tract. So let me kind of give you 2 illustrations. One is without the barrier in the 2014 situation. So 2014 low flow situation was very similar to the 2015 low flow situation. And as you can see, the Jersey Point and False River follow each other very, very closely throughout that entire time. This is September through April. And of course, it follows it much closer towards April because of, the flood flows and everything else as they were at that time. And then as we go into 2015, if you can kind of see how they're following each other on the left-hand side of the slide, but as soon as we install the barrier, you can see that they're separated. So that barrier or this illustration basically shows that by placing that barrier there, we get that separation. On the west side of the barrier, it continues to vary along with the tides, and on the right side, it's a much more muted variation. So let's look at the salinity intrusion a little bit further in, Bethel Island and Holland Tract, so forth. Again, this is 2014. you see how they're kind of varying together, maybe not quite as tight as the Jersey Point and False River locations, but they're still varying together. And then as we go into 2015, you can see how even those signatures become more muted as we install the barrier. So we've got evidence here that the barrier is working as designed, and we actually needed it quite a bit this past year. In 2015, one of the things that we did run into is higher than astronomical tides. So that means that the tides were actually higher than predicted. We usually get those kinds of situations when we get a lot of weather coming in, onshore breezes, low pressure systems and stuff like that. And without this barrier, we would have had a lot more salinity going into the central and south delta than we experienced. So it was money well spent for the delta farmers, as well as Contra Costa Water District and so forth. Just a real quick illustration of the barrier. This is actually when we're removing it. Just an aerial view. It's about 750 feet wide. Another nice picture of the tules and all the rock. So one of the questions is how is 2016 shaping up? And the nice news is that we will not have to build the West False River barrier or any barriers this particular year. We do have enough water. But contrary to the way a lot of people feel, the hydrology is pretty average. I've been up skiing quite a bit, and all of the folks that I'm skiing with are going, wow, this is great to have a lot of snow and everything else. And we're kind of going, well, you know, it's pretty average. How average is it? So I'm sorry, I wish this had come out a little bit better. It's kind of hard to see, but this dark blue line is the line that we're in right now, okay? These other lines down below are the last several years. And it's kind of hard to see, but on your handouts, you do see the big blue base. That big blue base is the average, okay? And so you can kind of see how we are just hitting that average. The upper diagram is for the northern portion of the state, and then the middle one is central portion, and then the south portion of the state. So as we go south, we get less and less snowpack or water content in our snowpack. And so we are really bouncing around average right now with our snowpack. And the same is actually true with our precipitation. We are really just flirting with that average line with our precipitation. If you look at your blue blob on your handouts, you can kind of see how the top of it really peaks out right around April 1st or a little bit after April. And really we're showing that we're not going to be getting any weather between now and April 1st at this point, except for maybe in the far north. And at that point, we are really just right at the average levels for our precipitation. Incidentally, the other lines on this particular map happen to be other El Nino years. And with this one coming in dead average, I counted it up, and it looks like it's kind of a flip of the coin as to whether or not El Nino is a good predictor of strong weather systems. Same thing here in the San Joaquin Basin. It's still pretty close to average. Actually, the San Joaquin Basin is running a little bit below average right now. So they're definitely having some tough issues down there. And that's about it. It's not moving. Oh, there it goes. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Are there any questions or comments on the update? Mr. Cabaldo?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So the initial modeling around the barrier suggested that under ebb conditions, we'd see some additional saltwater intrusion in the San Joaquin up towards Twitchell and into 3 Mile Slough as well. And I'm wondering, all of our monitoring stations were essentially behind the barrier. Do we know where the saltwater
Actually
went?
Yeah, we actually do have some additional monitoring right there in Fisherman's Cut, and then further up on the San Joaquin River, and we were tracking a lot of that. We also put in, as a part of the barrier installation, we added 11 new salinity and flow monitoring stations throughout the Delta that we're now caring for. Some of them go out as far as Suisun Marsh, and some of them as far north as really into the Steamboat Slough area. So we do have all of that information, and it's all been uploaded to our California Data Exchange.
But from those monitoring, did it perform outside of, on the salt side of the barrier? Did it perform as expected then? In terms, were there areas that experienced more saltwater intrusion than might have without the barrier as a result?
Yes, but that was really as a testament to the higher than astronomical tides that we were experiencing. So we were, because of those higher than astronomical tides, sometimes in as much as a foot or a little bit more higher than predicted tides, we ended up with some really high levels of salinity. Melinda is keenly aware of some of the exceedances that we had on the 3 Mile Slough area because of some of that situation. We have to release water from Oroville 3 days in advance to try to meet salinity down in those areas. And so it's our best estimate based on the modeling that's going to be coming down and everything else as to whether or not we're going to be able to meet those kinds of numbers. And so sometimes it's like driving along the freeway and you get to put your foot on the gas right now and you're going to measure your speed limit, in 3 miles from now. And, it's kind of hard to determine whether or not you're going to actually be able to meet that speed limit, 3 miles from now with how much gas you're putting on at this point. So we've been running into problems, especially because we did not have our usual capability of being able to reduce the amount of pumping that we were making in the South Delta. To give you for instance, the Department of Water Resources was allowed by the State Water Board to pump up to 750 CFS throughout the summer months. We limited ourselves to 300 to 350 CFS, so about half of that during that entire time. And when we turned that off, it did nothing for our salinity. And typically when regular summertime month, we'd be pumping 4,000 CFS, maybe 5,000 CFS. And when we shut that down, we have an immediate and discernible effect on salinity right away. And so that gives us that extra chance to meet salinity targets after we've released the water and we've taken our best guess. By turning down our pumps, we can actually meet salinity right away based on all of that monitoring. But when we only have 300 CFS at the pumps, and that's the only knob we control down there, that's the situation that we were in.
Commissioner Nolan?
Yeah, the modeling of the barrier beforehand, if I remember correctly, projected that there would be increased salinity in the Sacramento River. And as I understand what you're saying, that you don't think that that did not occur because of the barrier, or that it was simply the higher tides?
That is correct. The modeling that you're referring to was in the 2014 year, and we had suggested going all the way down to a net delta outflow of 2,000 CFS. The fishery agencies and the State Water Resources Control Board did not allow us to go down that far and held us at 3,000 CFS for net delta outflow. So we had to meet that 3,000 CFS as much as we could for those particular regulatory agencies.
So that offset the possible impact that would have come from the barrier?
Well, so the salinity that we were predicting at 2,000 net delta outflow never came about because of net delta outflow and our releases, but it did come about because of those higher than astronomical tides.
Got one other question. The CDEC report on Shasta shows that the flood reservation is being encroached.
Good,
Huh?
good.
Is that gonna stay encroached, continue, or they're gonna let it out?
Because it's operated by a federal agency, and the federal agency that requires us to bleed out the water, that's the Corps of Engineers. I would imagine that, and this is just speculation, I would imagine that Reclamation will probably adhere to the requirements of their sister agency, the Corps of Engineers, and start bleeding it out. Now, I'm hoping that they will be kind of lazy about it and not bleed it out quite as fast as maybe they're being told to, because we don't have any weather predicted in the future, or any significant weather. And if they just kind of drag their feet a little bit, pretty soon the filling curve that they have to meet will catch up to them because of time. And so if they just drag their feet, then maybe they'll be able to preserve a little bit more of that.
Yes, sir.
So I just want to report to the commission that I actually did go out and tour this facility when it was being installed. And I have to really actually commend the agency for a lot of thoughtful process that they went through, not only in the installation and forewarning boaters, but also how they accomplished these king tides with the ferry over at Jersey Island to Webb and Bradford Island. Thank you very much. There was some instances where with the king tides and the flow, that the ferry just didn't have enough power to actually combat that, and it was pushed into the Tules. They were rescued many times by the contractor. I believe the agency actually bought a larger motors for the ferry, or were going to.
It's supposed to go into dry dock very, very soon.
So this was something that was essential for the preservation of drinking water for Contra Costa County, the million people that actually utilize that. They were also proposing 3 of these. They ended up capturing only 1. So again, a little bit of an inconvenience for some of the boaters, which had to go Fisherman's Cut, but the accomplishments in that short term with preservation of Frank's Track and going forward, because once Frank's Track was inundated with salinity, it never gets flushed. And so thank you very much. And again, the willingness to work with the community, that's my district. And so, the kudos to the agency. Thank you very much for going the extra mile for the folks. And I got to say, it was feared in the beginning by the boating community and the residents, but the devil's in the details, and it worked out well.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Point well taken, because I remember the first time you were presenting the notion of multiple barriers, and you got beat up pretty good, and there were a lot of good questions, but I think it sounds like, I mean, and probably rightfully so, given the uncertainty of what it would, the impacts, and so it sounds like at least this one worked out better than expected. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for the presentation. All right, that concludes